everyone. Welcome to the Ginnie Graham Show this week. And I like to highlight different op-eds that are going into our publication. And this week we are with Carly Griffith Hotvedt. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And Carly is a member of our community advisory board, and she is the executive director of the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative out of the University of Arkansas. And she is writing this week about food sovereignty, which is probably a new term for some people. And so I just wanted to start out asking the easy question of, can you explain what food sovereignty is as you're referring to it?
Sure. And first, thanks for reaching out and asking about this. I'm always thrilled for the opportunity to get to share more about the work that we do. But when we talk about food sovereignty is really just the ability of the community to control and make its own decisions regarding food. It means, the ability to have control over production, availability, and selection, and affordability of food within the community. And so it's really a foundational concept related to a broader sovereignty thought processes we're thinking about, what does it mean to be sovereign? We can't be truly sovereign unless we can feed our own people. Food sovereignty is required for a broader sovereignty context. And so it's how people decide what foods are important to them, what foods are appropriate to them, what our, taste and cultural preferences and traditions dictate. And food sovereignty is kind of an all-encompassing thought about how we are in charge of our own food systems.
I remember in your column, you mentioned about kind of the history of food with indigenous nations. What are some of the things? Is it that the policies have interrupted that there is some history as to tribes were not able to do that in the past that now is being restored? I mean, can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. One of the questions that I always ask is, how do we get into this situation in the first place? What had to happen? What was the predicate for conditions that exist as they are currently to have gotten to this point? And I like to start, from the beginning. Tribes and indigenous people, we've been feeding ourselves since time immemorial. We've been navigating through our environment and relying on food sources that are available to us through, wild harvest, but also through, domestic production. My tribe, Cherokee Nation, we have been agrarian since pre-contact, since before European contact in the United States to what's now the United States. And we had been farming, especially Three Sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash, even before any sort of European contact. And so those traditions continued, but, based on a series of historical impacts and federal policy determinations, we have become separated from our food sources. And in many instances, tribes have become, reliant on some federal nutrition concepts. We especially see it through tribes that were subjected to removal processes, especially those on the Trail of Tears. We were frequently separated from our farms and our ranches and our seed stock at bayonet point. And so we had hours, if not minutes notice to collect as much things as we could, be relocated prior to being, separated out into groups and marched on the trail. And we lost our farm implements, we lost seed stock, we lost our livestock herds that we couldn't bring with us. But we also lost a lot of elders and some young people. And so a lot of that knowledge base related to our food and historic traditions didn't come with us. And so when we're looking at, what kind of policy impacts resulted, a lot of that's due to treaty policy, federal removal, presidential refusal to enforce Supreme Court decisions, and the Worcester v. Georgia case, which was largely predicated the Trail of Tears removal. And so we see all of these different types of, historical and policy impacts that resulted in a situation where we've become separated from our traditional and culturally relevant food sources. But we have also been very resilient and innovative and adaptive and have taken on an adopt and adapt mentality. And so there are some food sources that maybe aren't necessarily indigenous to the Americas that we have decided to adopt and adapt to fit us. You can't get through a Cherokee election season without going to 4 or 5 hog fries, because pork has become a very, staple component of our commodity. We have the second highest concentration of tribal producers in eastern Oklahoma compared to the rest of the nation. And the predominant majority of those are cattle ranchers or cattle operators. And we've had to be flexible and learn how to adapt in this situation, but there's still opportunities for improvement. And so there's been a series of, whether it's, lack of inclusivity in historic farm bills that didn't give same parity of opportunity to tribes or tribal producers, whether it's been treaty policy and removal policy, whether it has been, barriers related to access to credit for Native producers based on how we hold land differently, like in restricted or allotted status or in trust status. There's lots of different things that have occurred that have really been impactful for our food systems and impactful for our food security.
Well, I mentioned that the organization that you work for is based out of the University of Arkansas, but I know you personally live in Tulsa. So, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about what your organization does. How are you working in this issue?
Sure. So while we are housed at the University of Arkansas and I do live in Tulsa, our services are available to our tribal stakeholders across the United States. So any tribe that calls us and asks for help, we do what we can to support that. We are largely a think tank. We're a tribal ag law and policy focused think tank. So we look at opportunities to remove barriers and address challenges that are preventing parity of access and opportunity for tribes to really get into the driver's seat and make the best decisions that they can for themselves related to their food sovereignty goals. And so we have attorneys on staff, we do policy and regulatory research, we're available as subject matter experts to consult with tribal governments or with federal policymakers about changes that could be made to better support tribal agriculture, whether it's through statutory or regulatory considerations, or whether it's through tribal governments wanting to start their own departments of ag, or bring on their own tribal ag enterprises, or start running some additional programs to be beneficial for their agriculture systems and farmers and ranchers that are doing food production activities.
So you mentioned that each tribe will have its own goals and its own policies or approach. How does food sovereignty look different or maybe even the same among the tribes?
That's a great question. A couple of years ago, I did a lot of outreach to kind of prepare us to look at opportunities to address components of the Farm Bill to better serve Indian country. Farm Bill expired in 2023, and so we were hopeful to get a new one that same year. Obviously, we're still waiting on one, but I got to do a lot of outreach with tribes across the United States. I spent about 6 months on the road going and talking to them and asking what's working for you, what's not working for you with regard to your food and ag systems. And while there are a lot of commonalities about what the asks or requests were, there are a lot of differences, whether it's, geographic location, whether it's cultural tradition, whether it is, size, resources, capacity of, what scope folks are interested in, and then what natural resources are available to them in their location. And so, some tribes are looking at, we have a responsibility to feed our own people. We want to figure out how we can do more direct food distribution. Some are saying, hey, we want to be able to source within ourselves and not have to be reliant on any sort of external nutrition support or external, companies that we have to buy from. How can we grow our own food and then figure out a way for that to circulate within our reservation or local community? Some folks, just really want to say, hey, we have a really good agribusiness enterprise. We want to figure out how we can make as much money for this so that we can recirculate that through, our tribal government coffers. And some folks are looking at ways that agriculture can be a support for economic development and create more jobs for people. Indian country has MAP. When you overlay that for what's called a USDA food desert, there's a lot of similarities because tribes tend to be a little more remote. They tend to be a little more rural. And a lot of times we're at the end of the line when it comes to food distribution transportation. And so it's a matter of strengthening and securing our food systems and looking for ways to create, second options or redundancies so that when primary systems do fail, like we saw during the pandemic, we know that we have those backups in place, or we can rely upon our own selves to feed our people. And so when you're looking at, uniformity, every single tribe I talked to had a goal of conservation and land management. How can we do better? How can we treat our natural resources better so they can continue to be safe, healthy, and productive, and provide us with the food resources that we need to be successful? But when you look at, geographic differences, some tribes have a heavier emphasis on water. Some tribes want to have a better opportunity to do wild forest and wild harvest. Some tribes want to really take a look at their treaty rights and say, hey, federal government, you made us a promise and you have a duty and a responsibility to help us within agriculture and food systems. How are you making good on that promise? Other tribes say, federal government, we haven't had a great time with you. You've been a decent partner, but we want to figure out a way to do it ourselves. So we want to use self-determination opportunities so that we can administer the programs that you're leveraging ourselves for the benefit of our people. There's such a variety of prioritization that each tribal community has, and it's awesome to be able to help advance that in a way where we have the opportunity to create scenarios where tribes can make those decisions for themselves without having to address or encounter existing barriers.
You had mentioned the pandemic, and this issue kind of reminds me of one of the lessons I learned, and I still question, is this idea of how our food distribution system works overall in our country. And I remember writing a column about, the headline was, maybe we shouldn't be eating oranges in December, because when it breaks down, when it stops, then the food, we didn't realize how much we depend on trucking and rail and all these things. And we sort of had to look at, well, maybe we should be eating what's seasonal around us and what's within our reach. And that was sort of a lesson I learned. And I don't think the country has learned it, because we kind of went back to, back to our distributions. But what do you think, tribal leaders or citizens of tribes, what were some of the lessons that came out of that pandemic? Were they similar, different? I mean, where do you think food sovereignty issue came to the forefront during that time? I mean, how do you think COVID affected this issue?
Yeah, I think overall, I think COVID was a catalyst that really created a focused attention on how to resolve this issue. I always say that, pandemic situations didn't break anything within our food system. It just pulled the blanket back and showed us exactly where everything was broken. And so, as we've seen modernization within the agricultural industry, we've also seen a lot of consolidation. I think one of the best examples of that is within the meatpacking industry. There's 4 companies that have roughly 85% of the market share. And when those companies went down because COVID was spreading through those plants and their workers couldn't come to work because they were all sick, we all saw that bottleneck and the lack of availability of product, especially like, beef cuts or pork or different types of, animal protein that we expect to see. And so compounded with that, like I had mentioned, tribes tend to be a little more rural, a little more remote within their communities. If you didn't see that on shelves in Tulsa, you certainly weren't seeing that availability on shelves in Tahlequah or in Okmulgee or in Miami or places like that, except with the exception of the Quapaw Nation had their own beef and bison processing facility. And so they were able to process and self-source their own product, whereas everybody else was more reliant on, this national conglomerate system for industrial agriculture. And so it became very, very apparent that as tribal governments, there was a responsibility to step in and fill that gap and create that redundancy and really look at, are we doing everything that we can to be more resilient? And so tribes, quickly leveraged different federal funding opportunities to do direct food distribution, but we're also looking at how can we create infrastructure within our supply chain to better secure this? Because with that consolidation within the agriculture industry, you don't have those mid-level local or regional processors or packers or aggregators or local transportation or distribution. And so we saw multiple tribes bring on meat processing facilities. Some brought on greenhouses and produce processing facilities, and looked for ways to really be influential in strengthening that supply chain from a local perspective, so that we're, for the first time in many instances, seeing food products that are grown on reservation, processed on reservation, sold on reservation, essentially farm to table, all complete within the reservation, and only reservation or native hands have touched it. And so that's thrilling to see that, you know, we're having the opportunity to take, you know, beef on the hoof to beef on the plate without ever leaving the reservation. And there's also benefits for the local communities as well, because it creates additional market opportunity. If you're a livestock producer and you're having to just take market prices, you know, taking your cattle to the sale barn, you have an alternative market where if you want to have your own product processed at a federally inspected facility, you can then sell that product either directly to consumers or even across state lines if you choose. And so there's more flexibility and choice, which means there's a greater strength within that economy, because you have more resiliency as far as what your market opportunities are. So it's really exciting for me to see tribes make these investments and really be cognizant. One of the other things I wanted to mention is a lot of tribes realize that, you know, wild harvest opportunities are critical and directly relevant to our cultural practices. And so many tribes, including mine, Cherokee Nation, acquired land specifically intended to be used for wild harvest, whether that's animal protein or for, you know, gathering naturally occurring plants.
So in my last question, because food sovereignty is about tribes being able to feed its citizens, being able to create its own distribution systems. But are there opportunities for non-citizens to buy these products, to, you know, support the local tribes? Is there any, I don't know, for people who are interested in being able to buy some of these things in the market, where would they go? How would they find out about what tribes are making available to non-citizens?
Yes, there are quite a few, both brick and mortar retail opportunities, but also some online purchasing opportunities. I myself like to drive just outside of Beggs, south on Highway 75 to the Muskogee Creek Nation Loop Square meat processing facility. They have a retail distribution or a retail shop in there, so you can buy meat products that they process there. They also source other meat products from external distributors, so you have a scope of availability. But they also offer indigenous food products there, so you can get the line of food products that are available from Red Lake Nation Foods, which are in the Great Lakes area. And they have berry syrups and wild rice and jams and jellies that are really good. Quapaw coffee is available there. If you haven't had Ogapa coffee, it is delicious. I have like 3 or 4 bags at my house right now and just kind of cycle between their tribal soul blend or their holiday blend or their downstream blend, which is also what they serve in their casino on the floor. So you can get free Ogapa coffee if you go game at the Quapaw's downstream facility. Cherokee Nation's meat processing facility also has a retail space. So if you're looking for very affordable beef, I would recommend that you check that out, because beef prices are at an all-time high right now, and they offer very, very competitive rates. You can also check out Quapaw's meat processing facility, and then Osage has a meat processing facility in Hominy, and they offer products that they develop there as well. I also recently got to visit the Three Rivers Company, which is jointly owned by the Choctaw tribe, and they have some really great retail offerings in Smithville. So if you're on the way to Broken Bow or Hochatown for a vacation, you should definitely stop by and pick up some of their beef jerky and some of their other offerings that they have there. And lastly, we partner with the Intertribal Ag Council on quite a few different projects that we work on, but they have an American Indian Foods program. And the American Indian Foods program has a list of vendors that you can source product from, like Ramona Farms, that offers different types of beans and legumes, Sakari Hills, their products, or excuse me, Sakari, they offer like herbs and tea blends. And then Sika Hills, which is an enterprise of Yochadihi Winton out of California, has the best olive oil and balsamic vinegars that you can source. I love their products. And so there's a ton of opportunities available both online and locally to source and secure that. But also, I definitely recommend checking out the Tulsa Farmers Market, and then which is year round. And then there's a seasonal farmers market that College of Muskogee Nation hosts in the parking lot of Muskogee Nation's Loop Square facility, you know, during the warmer months of the year, where there you can find a lot of tribal producers that are selling there, but also at the Tulsa Farmers Market, there's some native producers that have booths there as well.
I'm just thinking of the coffee. I'm going back to this.
It's
I
so
want the
good.
Quapaw coffee. So that's going
Yeah.
to be my this week's goal. So, well, thank you so much. This has been such good information. I'm really excited about this issue and just the idea of uh, just just feeding people locally. There's so much power in that. And so thank you for coming on and explaining. I like to give people the last word. Is there anything you want to leave people thinking about? Anything you want to add as we in this conversation?
Sure. I always want to give a plug for our organization. If anybody's looking for more information about who we are and what we do, or, maybe checking out some of the resources that we have available, you can find us online at indigenousfoodandag.com. We're also on social media, Instagram, Facebook at indigenousfoodandagriculture.com. We're also on LinkedIn. So please feel free to check out the resources we have. And if you have questions, definitely reach out. We want to hear from you. And if we can provide any support for any tribal leader, tribal producer that's interested in growing, developing, or expanding food sovereignty efforts and, agribusiness enterprises, we want to do what we can to help you. So please reach out.
Thank you so much. It's always a treat talking to you. And everyone check that out. And I appreciate the time, and definitely read her op-ed that will be online, tulsa-world.com Thursday and in print on Sunday. So thank you.
Thank you. Wado, the donaga, boha'i.